Stranded in space on a ship crashing into the atmosphere of an unknown planet, Emil Spencer knew that the only way to survive would be by his own wits and guile. He vowed that somehow he would find and slay the titanic cosmic beast that put him in this predicament, VY572. With every installment, we follow Emil's explorations and discoveries on this journey of revenge against all odds. I'm Midnight Jester, and this is the Left Behind Starforge series.
Good morning, boys and girls and the rest of the world. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Well, not different in the sense of like something we've never done before, but against the grain, I guess you could say. Something that we don't usually do. Last time we left off with the lingering situation of the titanic jellyfish sucking the Beowulf up towards it and threatening to disable it. And we're going to get back to that, but not today. Today, I want to take the time to do something kind of akin to what we did when we knew we were about to spend a lot of great time and focus in Concord. If you remember, a while back, we did a little bit of a GM session to define what are the key people and places and things to bounce off of for Concord. And I want to do that for the prisoner transport ship, because I feel like next session, there's a decent chance we might get there. Certainly in the near future. The whole point is to catch up, stage this rescue. And sure, it's probably not going to have the same level of continual focus as Concord wound up. I mean, we've been there forever. But even still, I feel like I will have an easier time making that interesting once we get there if I know a little bit more about what is this ship they're on? What are some of the details we could find out about it? What are the things we could play around with? And every once in a while, as you know, I like just taking the time to kind of step back from the plot of the story and just do a little bit of world building. So we're going to do that this time. And if I'm being completely honest, these sessions tend to be a little bit of a breather for me. I feel less pressure when making them. It's not to say that I feel like they're just utter gimmies and there's no effort behind this, but the effort feels different. I feel a little bit lighter when trying to just interpret Oracle results the whole time, rather than continue to balance the whole gameplay. So anyway, in my attempt to kind of get ahead of my schedule a little bit, since I'm going to be spending some time out of town, I figured between that and really wanting to know more about this ship, this was the perfect opportunity. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And might as well start off with finding out what is the name of this ship so I can start referring to it by that name. So as we know, the Imperium came to Concord, they sieged it, they took over. They mostly didn't kill people, but captured them to bring them back to prison. And they had probably had a number of ships. We never directly saw what they came with, but I think, actually, let's start out before we even do a name. I want to ask the Oracle something. I want to know, are all the prisoners together on one ship, or are they separated across multiple? Because, I mean, that could really influence the way we have to approach this when we catch up. Are they scattered across multiple ships? I think I'm going to leave that completely up to just a coin flip. We're going to do 50-50 on this. I think it could be interesting either way, and there are reasons for it to go either way. So the question is, are all the prisoners on the same ship? At 50-50, the answer is yes. They are all on the same ship. Well, that does certainly simplify things for me once we get there. So now knowing that, that is probably not the only ship they're flying with. I think they are continuing to fly as a fleet, but the prisoners are on one particular ship. So now let's define some things about it. So first off, as we're going to get some heavy usage out of the Starship Oracles here, let's just start with the simple. Let's get a name for this thing. Okay, I feel like I want to re-roll this, go with something else, because the result that I got, it's an odd take for my imagination of an Imperium, governmental ship that's going to do prisoner transport, or a very cynical modern take on it. The name of the ship is Profit Margin, and wow, okay, so I need to determine, is it indeed that cynical that the Imperium, we've talked in the past, I don't want to characterize them as that level of they're just assholes. They are antagonists, sure, but they're not just trying to be out and out overly evil. And I feel like if they're even the ones calling a prisoner transport ship profit margin, that's going a little far there. So one of two things is going to have to happen for me to feel comfortable with that. One, we either get a different name, which easy enough. Two is this ship was originally something else, and it's been like, and like the name is the same, but it's been commandeered and it's being used as a prisoner transport ship, something like that. And I think that's the more interesting version. So what I'm going to do is we're going to roll a couple of things about what kind of ship this is and like what kind of mission it used to have. So we're going to get an idea, like, why was this thing called profit margin? It certainly speaks to me of like, it sounds like a trading kind of ship, like a freighter or something like that. And I rolled up Harvester, which also makes sense for a profit margin. Okay, so this ship was originally designed for probably, both spaceflight and air flight. It's designed to, actually, what is it harvesting? Because maybe it's harvesting just like space gas or something like that. I don't know what it's harvesting. Let's roll a descriptor and focus to get an idea of what kind of thing would this ship have originally been designed to harvest. Violent and force. That's super cool. That sounds like all kinds of hardcore kinetic energy, weird space shit to me. Not like, oh, this flew down to the surface of a planet and got wheat. Though either that or it's like the most metal wheat I've ever heard of, where the wheat threshes you. But okay, this is designed to harvest a violent force, which what that makes me think of is like something on a cosmic scale, like just the sun. Like this ship is designed to just directly harvest, or maybe what if it's supposed to be like a quasar or something like that? Yeah, what if this ship is designed to be able to withstand and actually harvest the like beam of radiation that comes out of like a quasar? And so as a result, it would have to they'd have to be able to find a quasar, which I suppose they could be given coordinates and stuff like directions from other ships. Maybe they don't have to do that completely, but it would make sense to me if they have some like really good scanners to know where to go to. And then, yeah, they just, this is the type of ship that gets in the way of electromagnetic radiation, powerful beams of it, probably on the very periphery of it. I don't think it could take like the full force of it. But there's a lot of energy to capture there, and this is a ship designed to do that. And it's probably it requires some very advanced technology to be able to do so, but we're basically talking about military technology here. Like the Terminus would have some really advanced shit, which does suggest to me, like, good luck just gunning this thing down. If it can take the force of just being utterly pummeled with that kind of radiation, I don't know that we're going to have a lot of luck just shooting it with guns and cannons and shit, which, considering we're trying to rescue prisoners from it, is probably a good thing. It'll be harder to accidentally blow it up from the outside. This seems like the type of thing you'd have to crack from the inside if you wanted to destroy the ship. Or, it could be a situation where it's like, a bulletproof vest is only going to help you so much against, like, being stabbed. Where, yes, it's designed to withstand a quasar specifically, but not weapons of warfare they're designed to crack this ship. I want to think, God, this is so intriguing to me. I'm really hung up on this for the moment. Perhaps, I want to know, how did they harvest, or how did this ship harvest it? Because, again, I don't know if the Imperium, actually, let's ask the Oracle, does the Imperium, outside of this exact situation, currently use this ship that way? It sounds like it. I'm going to put that as almost certain. Like, if they had that kind of capability, I feel like that would be within what the Imperium does. So almost certainly they do. But do they? Yes. Very strongly yes, even without the almost certain. But yeah. So the Imperium is just utilizing this, as makes sense with what we've seen. They've kept trying to pull in other ships from different areas. It seems like the Imperium is kind of like a, repurpose, use what you got, or buy it nearby. It seems like they don't exactly have a glut of ships. This isn't the Star Wars Empire where there's just TIE fighters out the wazoo. They've got ships, but they're not exactly overwhelming in supply. And so this harvester would also be good at just transporting prisoners, and that's what they're doing it for. There's one nearby, and so it's going to be utilized for it. But anyway, that was veering off from the question that I was wondering about. So if the Imperium uses this to harvest the energy from quasars, what does that look like? You know, do they extend a kind of disk that captures it? In which case, like, yeah, maybe that disk could take that kind of energy, but the ship itself probably wouldn't be able to. Or is it like a special kind of shielding that takes that energy and converts it, and it becomes like power on the ship, and so like the ship itself gets in the way with the shields, in which case, like, all these things, there are ways to work around. And I feel like Newton's Folly and somebody as warmongering as Bash, like, he'd know about this shit. He'd know how to work against these kinds of like capital ships. What are their weaknesses? Stuff like that. So rolling on some oracles for that, I'm going to do an action and theme for this to get an idea of like, what is it that they do in order to capture this massive amount of energy? And this may be too broad to work with, but let's see. Can we make this work? Will this be inspiring? I rolled charge and balance. Now what that most immediately makes me think of isn't that helpful for like answering the question I had, but it does make me think of like balancing the load in an airplane to make sure that everything will fly correctly, and similarly balancing the load on like an electrical grid so that what's being output is matching what's needed, all stuff like that. I imagine capturing this energy involves a lot of very tricky engineering like that, where there may be some amount of things that have to be like released as you're capturing it in order to not overload things. But again, that doesn't really answer my question. So since I have a very direct, specific one, I think I'm just going to use the move Ask the Oracle, which is, let's just go between these two options, and I'm going to leave it at 50-50 because I think either one could make sense. The first one is, as I mentioned, they extend some kind of like disk or unfolding mechanism that's like a solar array that captures this energy and can withstand it, and like that part of the ship could withstand it. But also, if something ever happened to it, it's kind of ancillary, so it's safer that way. Or the ship itself like absorbs it through the shielding. So 50-50, does the profit margin extend a kind of collecting array? Yes. And that yes would have even been true on unlikely. It was a very solid yes. So okay. Then that indeed suggests to me the ship itself is probably not any more impervious than other ships. It's got its own shielding, it's got its own armor, just like all these other ones, but you could take this down with the right kind of gunfire in the same way that we've seen with all these other ships. It's just that they have this very specialized device that I imagine unfolds into this huge kind of array in order to collect, but that's a separate matter, and it's certainly usually kept full. Actually, I'm going to roll on the Oracle for that too. Because maybe this thing is constantly spacebound, and it's just, since it's not ordinarily under fire, there's not the same kind of benefit to folding it back up. You know, we fold up solar arrays and stuff when things have to be launched, but if this is just always in space anyway, maybe there's no need for that to go in and out. So 50-50 on that as well. Does this collection array fold up? And then after that, I swear I'm going to move on to other things that may matter more. I got so stuck on this specific idea. No, this thing does not fold up. So okay, one more thing in the array. I'm going to use these Ask the Oracles just to find out how big it is. We're going to do our classic scaling up kind of thing. So I think it is almost certain that this array is 100 feet diagonally. I'm imagining this is like a big rectangle. So that the diagonal is, I think it's almost certain it's at least 100 feet. Yes. I think it is likely that this collection array is at least 500 feet. Yes, that one, it was even more solidly a yes. I think it is a 50-50 that this collection array is at least, let's go like half a mile. Yeah, like half a mile long, or half a mile on the diagonal. Yes. I think it is unlikely that this array is like 2 miles on the diagonal. Yes. I am rolling so many yeses today, and all of them have been so strongly. Even on I'm like, okay, so this thing is over. All right, we need small chance. We need to go all the way up here. There's a small chance this collection array is like 10 miles on the diagonal. No. But even that, okay, even that was a 32. I've been rolling really low on these D100 rolls. Well, other than when I rolled Violent that on the energy, which is a 100. But anyway, this thing is massive. This collection, right? No wonder it doesn't fold up. You know, it's somewhere between 2 and 10 miles on the diagonal. A huge array that sticks up from the top of the ship. I imagine it kind of on the back of it, almost like if you're imagining a Star Destroyer, how it's got like the upper bridge that sticks up with those like energy domes and shit like that. I imagine there is a similar, like the back of this ship is just this all across the back, which is several miles across, this huge, like up on, it's probably raised up a little bit on these big like pillars. You know, it's not directly on the surface. It's not like directly surface mounted, but supported by these massive pillars, there is this even more huge rectangular collection array that, for my imagination, probably does look a lot like just sort of a solar array. It's just with a very particular coating, and I want something to look weird about it. No, let's make it even more sci-fi. Let's have it in honor of that whole like balance energy thing. I don't think that any kind of like solar array kind of material would possibly withstand it. I think what we have here is there are these two on the far ends, there are these two gigantic poles that run up, and then between them there's kind of, the word that comes to mind for me is like a lightning barrier, because I'm thinking of Blades in the Dark. There's just this like energy field that runs between them that is relatively smooth, but it's this it's like this orange energy that runs between them. It's translucent. It's got like grid lines in it, and if it gets hit by a quasar beam, then we see all kinds of like gnarly, ripply, crackle kind of stuff that happens at the site of impact that then disperses out and gets collected down these tubes and energizes something. It's probably quite the sight to behold if you ever witness it. But okay, I promise you, when I first started this, I was not planning on spending so much time figuring out a quasar collecting array on the back of it, but hey, this is why we do this. I never would have thought of that for this ship. So that's why it's called the profit margin. There's probably big money to be made in quasar generated energy, just because you could get God, I don't even know what prefix I should use for the number of watts that you could collect quickly on that. Like, it's got to be in terawatts at least. And now, okay, usually I give this kind of prompting at the end of the episode, but rather than me look it up right now, I'm going to continue. But if anybody has information about like how many, like that measures the energy output of a quasar, if anybody wants to like XKCD this for me and let me know, if you had a rectangle, we'll say 5 miles on the diagonal, and it's being pummeled by the output of a quasar, how many watts of energy are we collecting here? Don't worry about its survival. That's the Imperium figured that out. Okay, let's move on. So that's the most notable thing about the profit margins outside. Now we need to learn a little bit more about its insides. I am going to roll another first look for it to find out, apart from this very noteworthy array, is there anything else we should know about it? Refitted or repurposed hull. I think I'm going to interpret that as just that since the Imperium has been using this, and sometimes it does need a little bit more of a battle readiness than the ship was initially designed for, we're going to say that it just got reinforced a little bit. Perhaps there are certain areas that were a little bit weak that have gotten some extra plating, things like that. It's got some, not full-on like heavy armor, it's just more that it's got a more military level, like military vehicle level of protection against weaponry. Whereas ordinarily this ship wouldn't have bothered with that. But anybody familiar with starships can see that it was added after the fact. You know, this is aftermarket. But now that we've gotten that kind of stuff established about the ship itself, we're going to do this very much like how I did Concord, which is we're going to use some derelict oracles here. We're going to pretend this is a derelict. We're going to define certain prominent zones that we should know about and figure out what's going on in that room. Now, we know that this is presumably it's a very engineering-focused ship / production. Like, engineering and production seem to be what this ship's original purpose would have been, but it does also have the ability to transport prisoners. Like, it's been reused. It's got a lot of capabilities here, but probably doesn't do a lot in the way of, like, research or a lot of other types of things. So, let's get started. Let's find out what our first zone is going to be. All right, we're indeed looking at an engineering zone. So let's do this the same way as before. We are going to start with an area. We're just going to roll for each thing. An area, a feature, a peril, and an opportunity. I believe that's how I did each one. So let's start off. Let's roll a specific area for it. Fuel or coolant tanks. That certainly suggests to me, given everything that we discussed about this array, like that energy's got to be stored somewhere. And I can imagine this being a pretty volatile area. That could certainly be a peril involved with it, but let's get a feature. Disassembled equipment. Okay, so perhaps in addition to live storage, there are also just components from old storage vessels that are no longer quite up to snuff. They need to be a little bit refurbished. They've been taken apart and examined and cleaned, and perhaps this room has a side area for doing that sort of thing. Let's indeed roll a peril. Fire or energy surge. Yeah, kind of what I was discussing there. This seems like a very volatile room, so I have to imagine this is the type of place that they would keep really locked down. Maybe this is probably very, very central to the ship, so that there is as much on the outside keeping this as stabilized as possible. Maybe even this room has a little bit of added gyroscopic stability to it, so no matter what the ship is doing, this should be staying, like, everything should keep this room from being jostled about. There's just so much energy being stored here. Everything is just like triple checked, all the sorts of things like that to make sure that it is all harnessed appropriately. Nothing should be able to fuck with it, because there's just a lot on the line if anything messes with this room. I imagine the canisters are done in such a way to make that as least likely as possible, but there are precautionary measures made. Now, it should be noted that, all this energy storage is what this ship used to do, but it's not its current active mission. It's probably not as full of these canisters as it once would have been. Like, it hasn't just collected a big quasar blast, and it's not transporting a whole room's worth of these right now. We have disassembled equipment. Some of these tanks aren't being used. They're being refurbished. Even some of the ones that aren't disassembled are probably not full. So there's still a danger of an energy surge, but it's probably not on the scale that they might be in a different situation. If this place had been full, if it had harvested to its maximum potential and is still getting its way to wherever it offloads this, we're probably carrying an amount of energy that, if something goes wrong, not only would the ship be destroyed, but maybe even like nearby stellar objects. I feel like this room can get extremely dangerous to itself and all around, whereas right now it's just carrying hazards to, like, probably nearby rooms on the ship. Like, it would be a big release of energy, a big explosion that could fuck a lot of things up. But I don't know that it would even inherently blow up the entirety of the ship. We'll see if that comes up. So let's also roll an opportunity for this room. And I get advanced or experimental equipment. My mind keeps going, like, it's the simple answer, but it feels like the most appropriate, which is just, in order to contain this kind of energy, like, the types of canisters involved have probably got to be pretty high-end technology. We've spoken this entire game about power cores, these just, like, orbs of massive amounts of energy that do sound pretty similar to what's happening here. And they're clearly at least somewhat rechargeable, and they allow these starships to do these kinds of jumps and all kinds of important stuff like that. This has got to be the next level up from there. Maybe it's just because they're so compact. It might just be that level of thing where it's the amount of energy, which is probably even more than a power core, and it's slightly smaller. So the opportunity here is perhaps that, like, if Emil and everybody, if we're able to get inside this room, which is probably pretty locked down and would be a diversion from the mission, but if we were able to do that and harvest some of these that have energy in them, like, they're relatively transportable, and it's like having a mini power core. A scavenger like Emil that makes devices could probably do a hell of a lot with something like this. Like, to get a sense of scale here, I've been imagining, the orb of a power core for a starship. I imagine that's something on the lines of, like, I've been imagining like a 6-foot diameter sphere as like the real center of that power core. And there's probably, crap around it. It's not a perfect sphere, but the actual energy part of it, pretty huge sphere. Certainly if you're powering like a giant starship, something like that. Whereas these canisters, I'm imagining more like propane tanks. Like you could lift it, there's like a handle on top. You could hold one in one hand. It may be a little bit heavy. You may want to do it in two, but size-wise, it's like a heavy object for one hand. Like maybe it doesn't hold as much energy as a full 6-foot power core, but still a huge amount in a small area. And that's the opportunity here, is that they found a way to really miniaturize this into something pretty compact. Now, when we did this for Concord, we did associate an NPC with each of these rooms. Admittedly, this time around, I don't know that there'll be the same need for that. Part of the reason I did it for Concord is I expected to spend so much time there and particularly interacting more socially with a lot of these people. And I don't know that that's really what's going to be going on the profit margin. So there's probably not the same need to make sure that we do an NPC for each of these rooms. We can get away with the Imperium just kind of being a little bit more nameless soldiers, and it just there are people that man these things. I guess the one question I will have for each room instead, or at the very least for this room, is I want to get a sense of, at a typical moment, how staffed is this room? I think that's a more important question for us. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to ask on a 50-50 first, like, are there typically people operating in this room? No. Which makes sense. It's largely a storage area. Some people might go in from time to time, but it's probably usually empty, is what we're saying from there. Now, if I had gotten a yes, I may have gotten a little bit more specific than that, but we got to know so we can move on. So this is a pretty simple room. We just have the canister storage area. Some of it is disassembled. It's usually pretty empty, but it's a volatile area. Why don't we move on to the next one? This time around, we get the zone of living. Okay, so there's at least a chance this might be related to where prisoners are kept. And I get new zone via access. This came up last time, and I feel like if we were actually undertaking an expedition in a derelict, this would be an important kind of thing to find out. But for our purposes, we're really just using this to try and define key areas that define this ship and are worthy of exploration. I don't know that this result is often the most helpful for me, so I'm just going to re-roll it. This is less about the exact layout of the ship and more about what could be found somewhere. So we get mess hall or dining. I'm going to roll a feature for that. Remains of the dead. Now that is a very odd pairing for mess hall or dining. Remains of the dead. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're dead bodies. It could have to do with their possessions. It would be quite the turn to find out the Imperium is just full on like cannibals. I don't think we're going to establish that. That stretches my believability a little bit. But I do want to use this Remains of the Dead somehow. I want to find a way to make this make sense. I suppose nothing said this is human dead bodies. I mean, to agree, a mess hall has the remains of the dead in it rather frequently. We usually call it meat. people eat the remains of the dead all the time. I'm the one who jumped to dead humans. So perhaps it's just that, unlike a lot of these ships, we established on Concord it was kind of atypical that they had to resort towards a kitchen during hard times, but usually they have another way to make food. But on the other hand, I'm feeling more of a pull towards making things weirder right now. I don't want it to be too mundane. Like, yeah, it could just mean there's meat here, but kind of boring. Let's push a little bit harder into the weirdness. I've recently watched the movie Heavy Metal for the first time, and that's kind of informing this decision right now because I'm now picturing, what if this is the first time that we've seen any evidence of a classic like undead kind of creature? I'm imagining a server in the back, kind of like buffet line worker that is just like an animated dead body. Like just a skeleton back there. It's super creepy, and I'm going back to imagery of like the Venture Brothers, where maybe this is a skeleton inside of a suit or something. So it's still hygienic. Like the bones, they're not touching the food. It's nothing like that, but inside of a spacesuit, and you can see it through the helmet. We have this sort of green misty skeleton inside that's like sublimating green mist that swirls around inside this helmet. It's just clearly a long dead being that is back there just like doing work. And boy, do I have a million questions about like how that came to be. And perhaps this is something that happened as a result of like collecting quasar energy. And perhaps this is somebody that once was out there like servicing the energy grid, the array that collects it, and there was a bit of a discharge, and it like that's why they were in this suit at the time, and it killed them sort of, but I see it as like the energy surge just went in through their suit, blasted them to the point where just like their whole body began to just erode away. It was ablating into this kind of sublimating green mist. It eroded away at the outer layers of their body, leaving behind just this skeleton. But while it can't talk anymore, the skeleton was still like it never died in that moment. The skeleton came back. They were never the same, but they weren't dead exactly. They just kind of kept on living this sort of unlife. And apparently the Imperium is just kind of willing to roll with that. They're like, I mean, why not? So my question is, if this was a person who once used to work on the array outside, like they did some kind of engineering sort of work like that, maintenance, repair, why is it that now that they're dead, they're working as like a cafeteria worker? Or are they, is it that they are not trusted anymore with anything that delicate and sensitive as working on the array, and so they've been put to task here? Maybe. It just continues to feel like a bit of an odd choice that of all places that they could be working, you'd specifically get them near your food. It feels like I need a stronger reason to connect those ideas. I like this idea of the skeleton dude, but I want to find a better way, like a reason why it's gotta be this way. And it might be that they're almost like they're haunting this area. Like they had some kind of connection to it in life and won't let go. Or maybe, okay, how about this? Maybe they're not serving the food, but this is a person that is so frequently in here because their body is constantly eroding and sublimating away this tissue. They have to eat so much to supply just the matter to have anything left to go. Otherwise, like they're clinging on to like this is yeah, let's re-roll this a little bit. They're not just mindless undead skeleton. They can talk. This person is still largely a person. They just look skeletal and weird and sublimating, and there's clearly something wrong, but they're not ready to go. And they're ravenously hungry because they need to keep supplying flesh to sublimate away into green gas that gets captured inside that suit. And so this is just a regular fixture of this room because they need to eat so much. Let's go with that. That makes a little bit more sense. And then maybe, like, because they're still intelligent and capable, they do still do other things on the ship. I mean, at this point, I feel like we have a full character we need to define a little bit more about. Let's do some character oracles here. So what is this Skeleman? What is their name? And we established before that the Imperium tends to be more like, at least the captains did full names as opposed to call signs. I'm going to continue that trend and say just Imperium crew, it's just regular names. Karthik Kwan. Karthik Kwan had quite the accident out there and is now this living, decaying being that needs to ravenously eat in order to keep up with just the matter eroding away from their body is trying so hard not to exist. But so far they're able to keep it at bay. So Karthik Kwan, I don't feel like I need to roll a first look on them. I think the first look is pretty clear. Spacesuit, skeletal rotting, gassy face. It makes an impression. Now, the more I think about this, the more I think just knowing the name Karthik Kwan, that may well be enough, because what else would I roll here? I don't know that we need an initial disposition. Well, maybe we could roll that to find out, like, generally, are they in a good mood or not. But character roll, I mean, we already established they're kind of, they do fixing on the outside of the ship. And they clearly at least do that, so some kind of engineering roll. Goal, I would imagine that their most pressing goal would be, other than just immediate survival, finding a way to undo this curse. Like, is there a way to make their bodies stop just shedding itself and go back to normal? They probably want to find a proper medical facility research facility that could find a way to undo this. That's probably Karthik's goal. I can't imagine something else being more important to him, so I'm not gonna roll that one. Maybe a revealed character aspect. Okay, let's do initial disposition. So generally, what kind of mood is he in? Wanting, which, given what we established, to me, it speaks back to that kind of undead hunger. You know, he's not a zombie. He's not just gonna eat your flesh, because he's still got enough humanity inside to not do that sort of thing. But I think, in addition to wanting the help of, like, get out of this situation, I think there is that kind of background hunger for, I could eat the sweet forbidden flesh of people and maybe that would last a little bit longer. Karthik always feels that pull inside in a vampiric way. There are all these food sources around me and I have this insatiable hunger. I want to feast. Man, they gotta get Karthik the fuck off this ship. Karthik is bad news for the Imperium. They're clearly not willing to just kill him, but maybe he's kind of technically already dead and is a lost cause, and it would be better for everybody if he weren't around. Anyway, there's a little bit about Karthik Kwan. Let's get a revealed character aspect. Passive. Well, that's interesting given everything we just said about how ravenously hungry Karthik is, but maybe this is passive in the sense that he's really trying to conserve energy a lot of the time because he's trying to keep all this stuff at bay. Or maybe even in order to deal with this kind of hunger, Karthik is typically in a sort of meditative state to try and just find that inner peace to quell these thoughts. Try and keep them at bay because they are so dangerous. If he indulges in them, who knows where it could lead. So Karthik has a yoga trance-like disposition a lot of the time in order to counteract the madness inside. So anyway, that is not what I was expecting to get out of our living area and certainly not a cafeteria, but we found out that there's a cafeteria that's, it's whatever. It's a place to eat. I suppose we should still roll a peril and an opportunity for it. But the feature sure turned into a feature presentation there. All right, a peril of this room. Booby trap. Huh. So somebody is specifically trapped an aspect of this room. That also feels hard to square. Like, whoa. If this is an active ship, that makes more sense for a derelict, but an active ship where people are eating and yet we have a booby trap left here. It's probably something pretty minor and not lethal. but maybe there's something they want to discourage. Maybe it's something on the level of like, I think of the exploding ink from like money that you might steal from a bank. Maybe it's something like that in order to make sure people aren't just taking food, that there is a particular way to access it, that only the people that actually work this area, they know the right way to set up the food and everything. And maybe yeah, they've had a big problem. Maybe it's related to Karthik. They've had a big problem with people just trying to take food for themselves, sneaking in here and everything. And so there's a booby trap to just kind of identify anyone who's been doing that in a very similar kind of way, where there's just kind of a residue that happens when you that coats you if you don't deactivate it properly, and so it's easy to know who's been taking more than their fair share. I actually think it's probably not because of Karthik. I think Karthik, everybody is established and knows, like, yeah, Karthik needs a lot to eat. Don't do anything to stop him. If Karthik wants to eat regular food and not people, you let Karthik eat. It's probably others who have just been a little bit greedy, and it's been a long-standing problem. This also could have been more of an issue previously. Like, I'm actually going to ask the Oracle real quick. Was this always an Imperium ship? 50-50. Yes. Okay, so it was always Imperium, but maybe in its former life that was more directed around energy capture. These are long trips. You probably have to ration the food appropriately. There are probably times where the food will only go so long, and they want to make sure that it can last the entire voyage. So they had some issues. They've made it such that you'll be found out if you're taking more than you should be. Relatively simple. And then let's roll an opportunity for this room. Culturally significant object or artifact. I tell you what this makes me think of, just because of my own personal experience. And this is going to take a little bit of a tangent in order to get there. When I was growing up, I went to a private elementary school that was very religious. And this makes me think back to how, like, after we'd eat in the big lunchroom, everybody would be passed out these, this isn't quite accurate, but it'll just get the point across better, prayer books. They weren't really full-on books, but it doesn't matter. They were like these laminated sheets that had the prayers that we said after we ate. And it's all done like a song. Like it's basically a song the entire room sings as a thanking to God for eating. Anyway, that was part of my past, and it's making me think of something like that. Like, what if there's a kind of ritual aspect to either the beginning or end of eating, something like that, like we do this all together. And it's not like, I don't want this to be full on literally religious. I think it's culturally significant, right? Like the Imperium just has, I think a communal kind of culture to it where we're all in this together. And so I'm going to lean into that direction. I think that there is a book of songs, almost like sea shanties is the way I'm thinking of it. Like, it's not thanking God kind of songs, but when they end meals together, they sing. And I think there's a tradition of coming up with new songs and stuff, and the especially good ones wind up in this book that's kept in this room. And usually there'll be kind of a leader who chooses which ones are we singing today. This also actually harkens back to my summer camp experience where we had a thing like this, where there were all kinds of songs that we sang. People would choose which ones were going on like that day, because there were too many to do every single day. But here's a book of the kind of classics, and every once in a while people add more to them. But somebody or another, and it's probably some kind of honor to be chosen as like, you're the one who's going to be leading today. But whoever's leading takes the book and they choose which ones they want. It's got all the lyrics in there, and they lead the group in some songs that last like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, something like that. It's just a bonding sort of thing. Yeah, I like that. I like it not being too just, like, some things should just be very mundane and just nice. They're not all Karthik Kwan skeleton problems. Sometimes it's just, we got a fun book of songs in here. Now, why is that an opportunity for exploration? It's a minor one, but if you want to learn a bunch of songs, I guess. Actually, let's allow there to be a little bit more depth there. Now, there's no reason to be able to ever know this, so it's probably not going to come up, but maybe if you ever really read through all those songs, because some of them go back a long time, maybe there's a little bit of information that could help you get a little bit of better historical context on certain moments that happened. Like, what is the Imperium's perspective on things, including what if they have a song that relates to the vaults and, seal it all away? Again, I'm thinking of this almost like a sea shanty. It's something that they would have sang. It's like something that they're singing commemorating the idea of it all being locked away. And the song itself is still very vague, but maybe there are some hints in there about the vaults, about where they are, about what's in them, something like that. It's not going to be like a key piece of evidence, but it's something that you could you could get their side of it. Minor opportunity court kind of thing. All right, let's roll another zone. We've got an engineering zone. We have a living zone. Based on what this ship did, I don't think it's necessarily got like a zone for everything. I do want to find out, like, the most important thing, I want to find out more about like where the prisoner's being kept, because that's definitely going to be relevant. Nice as it is to find out about this fucking like skeleton and songbook in the cafeteria, let's find out the thing that's definitely going to be relevant, where the prisoners are being kept. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to roll just a random zone to find out what kind of area are they in, because they may not be directly being stored in, like, this isn't originally a prisoner transport ship, so it's not just cells like we had on, it's not just like cells we had like on the Stardust. Maybe. I'm going to randomly determine this and find out, like, what did they have, like, one way or another, this ship clearly had enough room, and so they're taking all these people, but where have they wound up? So we're going to roll a random zone. And in this case, we get medical, which makes sense. There's probably a lot of them are pretty injured. So what kind of area, what sort of medical area have they been keeping these prisoners inside of? Holy shit, is that dark? I rolled crematorium. Okay, I want to be perfectly clear. I am not going to lean into that level of darkness and say that, like, they're not taking these people to put them in the crematorium living. That's no. For one thing, why would they bother? Like, we already had established that they had the opportunity. If they could have just taken over and killed everybody, they chose not to. They're taking them back. So we're not doing that. But it is where they had room. So there's this inherent threat the entire time, because all these people from Concord, they are staying in these rooms that they're not active right now, but they're giant furnaces, basically. They could be turned on. Now, I think we do have to reimagine this a little bit, because a crematorium for medical, like that, that's the size of, like, lay down one body in there. There are probably hundreds of people that they're taking, at least 100 that are being transported. I don't know how many survivors, or on the order of like 100 or so. I don't think, like, the visual I had in my mind that would be really creepy would be like they have to be sleeping inside of these just crematorium tubes that aren't turned on, but you see where they would be, like you see the little spouts where the fire would come out to just utterly incinerate somebody inside here, and good luck sleeping well in there. I don't know why they would have so many of them, though. Like, nothing about this ship's old or current purpose suggests they need 100 crematoriums because it's that active. So rather than consider this a medical area, I'm going to pivot a little bit. We're going to use that as inspiration for something different. I think this is more one giant room where it's been kind of like a holding area that is still for incineration and still could be. There still is that creepy visual of we're staying inside this pretty bare room where there's all the evidence of the old char on the walls, and we see all the spouts where the fires would come out. It's all visible and super intimidating, but it's not inherently, it was never designed for doing it to bodies. I think this would probably be more for like more like a foundry or something. Like, it's for metals or ore or some kind of processing, or maybe even, okay, let's bring this back to the energy balance thing. This is the room where, when you are collecting the quasar energy, when the array gets hit, yes, a lot of that goes into canisters of storage, but it's too much all at once, and it all has to go somewhere. This is the room where that excess energy when that is happening, gets utterly blasted through here to just melt shit down. And this is a room that can take it. And maybe there are times to otherwise gain the benefits of that. Just trash, things that you need to be utterly obliterated. Just junk that accumulates over time. Usually gets stored in this room. And then when they do a Quasar collection, it gets just utterly annihilated by the portion of that energy that gets redirected into this room and blasted outwards. I think this would be like towards the back of the ship, near engines and stuff. Perhaps it passes through this room, annihilates what's inside, and then that becomes just utter ash that is eventually, I don't know, either dispersed into space or compacted and brought to some other purpose. I'm not sure. It was never meant for people, though. But it's a pretty big open room, and they have a lot of people to transport. And they're not looking to be especially nice to them. And hey, if they get a little intimidated by this room into not starting some shit, maybe all the better. Perhaps there are a few of these. I'm going to ask the Oracle on that. Like, is this one giant room where everybody is inside? Or are there multiple of these areas where these different kind of crematoria where the energy gets redirected at times? Again, it's not currently active, but let's ask the Oracle. I'm going to say 50-50 on it being one giant room or several smaller ones. So is it one giant room? Yes. And that would have been true even on small chance. I rolled a 4. So no matter what I set that as, it would have been a yes. This is one giant room where all the prisoners are inside. So I see it almost like a Squid Game kind of situation. The bunk room where everybody sleeps inside between the matches. There probably are similar levels of just rudimentary, just cots, metal frames that you can sleep on that are stacked up in here, made out of the junk that would otherwise be obliterated. So I imagine the prisoners they're doing their best to make the best of a bad situation in here. They're all crammed in together in a super intimidating room. And also there's probably some amount of malice held towards people that like helped prop up Magpie before. Like his keys to power, even though they've probably all basically turned on him at this point and realized, oh yeah, he was a piece of shit and he abandoned us and like he was a bad call. But those that helped him get there, even if they've since changed their mind, there are probably some dividing lines in here on like kind of factions formed. Or I guess the factions were already formed, but there's bitterness there. Like, man, Vert? I mean, he's probably been... God, what happened to Vert? Would he have survived? I don't want to just kill him off screen, so he has to have survived, but I can't imagine he has his power armor on him. Like, they wouldn't have left him with that. That's somewhere else on the ship. So he's probably more vulnerable than usual in here, and a lot of people don't like him. At least are very bitter towards him. So yeah, this is not a happy room to be in for all kinds of reasons. And I'm glad that we've generated this because, yeah, the idea of them being in an old, like, furnace is not what I would have imagined, but that puts a little spin on this. It also means that there may be different ways to access this room than just, like, the door. You know, if energy and shit has to get funneled to this room, maybe there are conduits and, like Jeffrey's tube kind of corridors that get here. Maybe there are ways that we could kind of sneak in through the vents kind of situation. I don't know. We'll have to explore that when the time comes. Let's still roll a peril and an opportunity for it. Actually, I suppose we haven't rolled a feature yet. Let's see. Is there an important feature? Given this is medical features, it's probably not going to be all that relevant, but let's see. Maybe we can make it work. Corpse of a healer. Oh god, I mean, that made me think back to Vert and his attempts to try and learn to be a doctor. It could just be that I'm not going to do that, but clearly it may not literally be a healer, but somebody has died in here and the Imperium hasn't done anything about it yet. They've like moved the body over to the corner of the room. Somebody has not survived this journey and they have to just try and ignore it as best as possible, but somebody's dead in here. Let's see, of a healer. Now that makes the most sense when this is just a medical area on a derelict ship. I don't know that it's important that we determine exactly who this is. It's probably one of the many characters that have not been named. And now that they're dead, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of benefit in determining a lot about them now. Just somebody died in here. That's the important bit. Let's get a peril and an opportunity. Actually, I'm not going to bother rolling the peril because I think this is going to be a pretty simple room. And again, it's probably going to be types of stuff that are going to be hard to square with the way we've adapted this room. The main peril is if they ever turn this room on, everybody inside could be incinerated without really a lot they could do about it. You know, that's the very obvious peril. But there is an opportunity in here, and that's what I'm interested in rolling. Now, this again might be hard to make sense of given the situation we have of it being a kind of modified room, but let's see if there's a way we can make this work. So, an opportunity in here. Clues to a medical mystery. Something that got incinerated in here didn't get fully so. You know, this makes me think of what happened to Karthik Kwan. Given that Karthik became the way that he is because of the discharge from the array that collects energy, and this is a room that otherwise disperses the energy from the quasar, it's all connected to that. So maybe there are clues to that mystery in here. Some kind of byproduct or residue that passed through this room that is related to that. Perhaps something that could be used to make a kind of lingering, horrible on life. Not saying anybody would necessarily want to, but maybe there is something in here. Maybe this could have something to do with the dead body that's in the corner. Like, what did they die of? You know? Did they just, starve to death? Were they killed by somebody in here? Given that it says medical mystery and there's clues to it, something stranger might have happened to them. My guess is that they were otherwise kind of weak and weary, and there's probably a lot of ashy residue and dust and stuff in the air that's not great to breathe, and they just took in too much of that. But in addition, we know that Karthik Kwan died as a result of weird, unexpected discharge from the array that collects this quasar energy, and then directs a lot of it through this room, usually. So whatever residue is in here has some relation to all of that. Maybe even is stuff remaining from what happened to Karthik Kwan. That may have been the last time they did any of this. So here's what I'm thinking. I think the dead body in here, maybe some piece of what is reanimating Karthik Kwan, or keeping him animated, has some developing seeds. It has a foothold in the dead body in this room. And while Karthik, never died, officially. Karthik has just been in this awful decaying state this whole time, but never, died and came back. I think this body, perhaps, has slowly been getting worked on by this force that keeps Karthik alive, and perhaps could, over time, eventually come back and have that same hunger. And maybe when they came back, they would be more dangerous like a classic zombie, because they did fully die. You know, Karthik keeps it together because Karthik has been alive the whole time, has the ability to keep that state of calm, meditative, keep it at bay. Whereas this would just be a reanimated dead body that would hunger. And so perhaps the body has indications of that this is developing. They've been largely ignoring it because it's very subtle and they want to just keep the body in the corner. But perhaps there are signs of changes happening and little stirrings and stuff. Times that the fingers will just kind of twitch and flex if you're paying attention, but few people are. And that's over in the corner. Interesting to me that this was the result of an opportunity, not a peril. I suppose the opportunity would be anybody so inclined could study this to find maybe a more benign version of a way to bring back the dead. I suppose it's all in the eye of the beholder. You know, you could probably weaponize this to really fuck up the Imperium or your enemies in general. I suppose that would be an opportunity. Anyway, though, unlike a normal episode where I'd ordinarily have a big kind of climactic moment to roll out on, the weird thing about these episodes is they just kind of all right, I think we've done what we are here to do. And I think that's basically the point. You know, this was never going to be Concord level of detail, but just here are a few touchstones we could use when we finally get to this ship. Things that certainly intrigue me along the way. And as for which ones are going to actually come up, well, that's a question for next time. And then the other weird thing about these is that I come back for the outro, which feels like more or less a continuation of what I was doing before. It's kind of this arbitrary line where I'm like, okay, before I'm done with the show, and now I'm back for the outro. The main distinguishing part is, of course, this is where we get the prompts. I put a little thought into what they should be this week, and I've decided on this. I'm going to give you a descriptor and a focus, and I would like you to provide for me a sound that reminds you of. I want you to imagine that you're walking through an environment, and off in the distance you hear something based on this descriptor and focus. Tell me about what it is you're hearing. Really paint an acoustic picture as best as you can. The descriptor and focus are sacred and archive. That's interesting. So maybe it's actually the sound. Well, I don't want to give you too many ideas, but maybe this is a sacred archive. What does that sound like? Maybe sacred archive is something less literal, but you're hearing something that you're inspired by those words off in the distance. Tell me about where you are, what you're hearing, anything like that. Send me your ideas at starforgedpod@gmail.com. I can't stress enough how much joy it brings me when I see somebody write something in with one of these, so please do take that moment to exercise your own creativity. It's a muscle, it needs some work. Send me your ideas there, and of course, I just love hearing from you in any capacity. It's always nice to get that confirmation that people are listening, people are enjoying. Got a lovely message just recently from Nightstride over on the Discord, who seems to be listening to this show exactly the way that I would be if I were listening to it, which is listen to it in the background while doing other things. That's how I like listening to podcasts. That is why this has always been audio only with that focus right from the beginning. I'll tell you now, the very first episode I actually recorded with video, just in case I wanted this to be a video podcast. Part of why my virtual tabletop is actually all set up with like some graphics and stuff, so there are visuals for everybody in case they could see them. But then I ultimately decided, no, if I were listening to a podcast, I'd just be listening. And this way I'd be able to have a better ability to edit it without it looking weird, and anyhow. Listening in the background while you're doing something else, that's what this was made to be done. I'm glad to hear that people are doing that. And for something else you can listen to in the background, play me out, music.